My name is Wendy Larson. I'm a professor emerita at the University of Oregon, which is on the west coast of the United States, north of California. And I've worked there for some 30 years, doing work on modern Chinese literature. I've taught modern Chinese literature, Chinese language, all kinds of various other courses, but mostly what I've been doing is working with graduate students, getting their PhD, and undergraduates trying to learn a little bit about Chinese literature. So I've been at CAPAS now for a few months, and this project started when I finished my last project, which was on optimism under socialism and capitalism, especially in culture and literature. And I've wanted for a long time to focus on a single writer, and I was fumbling around trying to figure out which writer would be best, and I really like Mo Yan's work. And a colleague over at the Center for Asian and Transcultural Studies told me that CAPAS had a project on biopolitics that my work would fit in with. So I decided to apply, and I really made quite a bit of progress here, also trying to understand the apocalypse studies and what kind of theories are used in looking at apocalypse and what is apocalyptic about certain kinds of work. So my goal is to write a book on Mo Yan's novel Sandalwood Death, a single novel, and this is a new departure for me because I've always worked pretty much in cultural studies. Sandalwood Death, because it is set during this historical period that I mentioned, the Boxer Revolution, around 1899 to 1901. It concerns the opposition to the railroad building project that was sponsored by the imperial government, and at that time Germany was one of the foreign governments that was working to build railroads in China. And the opposition came from a group of people at this time who were using, in the novel, they were using opera, or what they call cat opera, as a form of resistance and acting out martial roles. And so it concerns this opposition of the local culture and what is important to local people, the land in which the railroad is just crossing over with no reference to customs such as burial grounds, and also just the general influence of foreigners in China at the time and the loss of power by the central imperial government. But it's very colorful because it focuses on a few people who work in a dog restaurant, butcher shop, and their lives and how they're embroiled with all of this opposition to foreigners, to railroads, and to the changing culture of the time. So Mo Yan depicts the cultural apocalypse by showing really how the Allied forces, composed of actually 8 countries, but in this case focusing on Germany, come into China and just try to take land, to control territory, and then to impose their culture on the locals, because it doesn't matter what the locals do. They don't see it, they don't understand it. And so cartoons is actually, it's called Maoqiang in Chinese, and it's a real form of opera in Shandong province, a local, very local opera that's performed in open air spaces. But he changed the name to make it fanciful and called it cartoons because Mao is the same sound as Mao with different tones. So cartoons are a way of enacting old stories from Chinese oral literature. And this is one of his major themes, is that oral literature provides both a kind of literary base for him thinking about how to write, but also a kind of resistance, a form of resistance. And this is where you have these apocalyptic changes coming in and thinking about how culture changes in ways that leave certain people out and privileges other people. So I think that's really what the novel is about. And in his afterword, he talks about this, how he tried to write in his own way, but he found that Western forms were infiltrating his writing. And so when he look back at it, he had to throw the writing away and start all over. And this is where he started to think cartoons has to come to the fore and be on central stage. So the name of the book is Sandalwood Death, and this refers to a particular kind of torture, and one of the main characters in the book used to be the imperial executioner, and he is drafted after retirement to conduct this torture on the leader of the Cattoons troupe. And so that death, there are several actual tortures in the novel. They're very gruesome. This is one of the critiques of Moyen's writing, is that his language is extremely detailed, very gruesome and sensual in a way. So you really go through these tortures as you're reading. But that involves, particularly the Sandalwood Death, involves putting a sandalwood stake up through the body, up through the neck, and then keeping the person alive as long as possible, so that suffering is enhanced. And this in the novel is supposed to occur at the time of the opening of the railroad. So this is biopolitics in the extreme. It is making an example of somebody because of their resistance and opposition. And not only the executioner, the leader of the troupe is himself killed, but many people are killed by the troops, the Imperial and German troops, as they're trying to set up the railroad. There's a lot of interesting, funny superstitions about the railroad. The book, even though it is gruesome, it's also very funny. One, for example, has to do with the idea that Moyen said he heard as a child that the queues, the long hair of the Chinese men during the Qing dynasty, were cut off and put under the railroad tracks, and that's what powered the railroad. So, you know, this is an apocalyptic vision that takes place on two levels. One is the actual physical torture, and the other is this kind of apocalypse of culture, you know, the erasing of the old culture. And so he does this in a way that you have to connect these yourself. If you read his afterword, you'll get his explanation, which I think is just part of the performance that he does, the literary performance. But you have to connect it and think it through, and it's this imaginative quality that I'm going to try to be working on as I continue this project. Yes, so he won the Nobel Prize in 2012, and of course this pushed him way up in terms of his global visibility, because I don't think that he was well known in the West, although he was well known in China before this. Part of the reason is that he'd been picked up by filmmakers. His stories had been turned into films, especially by Zhang Yimou. And so he was very well known as a writer at that point. I think that the problematic position of Chinese literature and world literature has to do with the themes of Sandalwood Death, because what he looks at is the predominance or the prevalence and the power of Western forms of writing in the novel and also in the afterword. And this is a constant topic when I talk to people in China about why those of us in the West don't read their literature. And many people in the West find it hard to read because it doesn't adhere to the kind of novelistic form that we're used to. So he certainly is very famous now. He's very well known, but he's also interested in trying to develop something that may not be very accessible to Westerners trained in our novelistic conventions. Well, I really learned a lot about apocalyptic studies here at CAPAS, and this was something I don't think I'd thought about very much in the past. And so here I realized this is a whole way of looking at what's going on in the world. And I'm very fortunate to be here because it works so well in this study. You know, it just works perfectly in this study. So I'll be developing this a lot more, and what it means to me intellectually, I think that will expand. I've come into contact with so many people working on different aspects of apocalypse. Is it the end of the world? Is it the end of our world? Is it the end of my world? What kind of end really is it? And how does it function both in things like climate change and environment, but also culturally? So I'm really interested in going further on this topic. Well, so many of Nguyen's novels have been translated into various languages, and not only Sandalwood Death, but other novels as well, and short stories. He has collections of short stories, and I would recommend all of those, maybe starting with Red Sorghum, which is a novel, has been made into a film by Zhang Yimou. So it's very accessible, and it dates from the early 80s. It's one of the first films that came out to break the socialist mindset about culture. So it's quite interesting from a historical perspective. There's another film that I like very much based on a Nguyen story, and the name of the film is Happy Times. The story is called Shifu, You'll Do Anything for a Laugh. And it deals with the post-socialist period. So what happens after all of these state factories go defunct? And what happens to the people who used to work in them and gain their identity from really working in these, and how they're living and how they're getting by. I think, in terms of apocalypse, I don't think that the consciousness about apocalypse is very prevalent in China. I think it's more concerned with how do we modernize, and how do we develop certain aspects of our culture and our technology and our industry so that we can be in the world like other cultures and other societies. But there is a very strong environmental movement, and environmental literature is also very powerful in China. So I'm going to be looking at all of that as I try to figure out how to deal with apocalypse in the future.